A few months back, myself and James from the Oasis podcast put out a video where we discussed the meaning of the lyrics from Don't Look Back in Anger. We discussed all kinds of different elements of the song, but I felt like the song was something of a bittersweet breakup song. I always felt that it was actually about the ending of a relationship. When talking about the meaning of his lyrics in this song, Noel Gallagher has always seemed to actively throw dust in the air as if trying to hide the meaning. In the recent track-by-track documentary on the Oasis YouTube channel, he talks about the influence of the John Lennon quotes in the bridge. Elsewhere, he talks about how "stand up beside the fireplace and take that look from off your face" is a quote from his mum, Peggy Gallagher. But when it comes to the meaning of the rest of the song, he's always been a little bit evasive.
I wrote it in Paris after a night at a strip club. So I've often wondered, is Sally a stripper? It sounds like a piss take, but I've often wondered that. But I don't know who Sally is. Although somebody did come up to me years later and said, it's like a girl said, "It's Sally Cinnamon." And I was like, fucking brilliant, what a fucking, I wish I'd have thought of that. I'd have fucking rinsed that story for fucking years.
Over the years, Noel has said all kinds of things about this song. He said that the lyrics are meaningless. He said that most of the words are there just to wind people up. And for a long time, I took him at his word. Noel has always said that at the time of writing the song, he didn't know anyone called Sally. And I think that's true. However, the song is about a girl that he did know. It's just she wasn't called Sally. That's an alias. So to tell this story, we need to go back in time over a quarter of a century to 1994. On September the 26th, 1994, Oasis played their first ever gig in San Francisco in the States at a venue called Bottom of the Hill. This was part of the Definitely Maybe tour, and during that gig, Noel locked eyes with a girl in the audience. They definitely liked each other, and once the gig was over, this girl went backstage and Noel walked over and sat down next to her. She said to him, "Where's the after party?" And he replied, "What after party? Can I hang out with you tonight?" They spent that night together and seemingly actually connected with each other in something of a meaningful way. Noel got her phone number and he actually stayed in touch with her as he continued the tour. And that girl's name is Melissa Lim. Three days after Noel met her at the San Francisco gig, Oasis played their disastrous nightmare gig at the Whisky A Go-Go in LA. The story is very well known and it's recounted in the documentary Supersonic. The whole band and crew got completely smacked off their heads on crystal meth the night before the gig, and they didn't sleep a wink. So the whole band and all the stagehands had not slept for approximately 36 hours by the time they went on stage. And because the crew had done the same thing as the band, there'd been mistakes made everywhere. The band had different set lists. They were playing different songs at the same time and wondering why everything sounded so weird. It was apparently one of the worst gigs they ever played, if not the worst. By the end of the gig, Noel was absolutely furious and on the edge. And then Liam tipped him over the edge by throwing a tambourine at him on stage. Now that seems like a silly little thing, but apparently it was the final straw that broke the camel's back.
Yeah, I was in a fury. I left a little bit of me on that stage that night.
That night after the gig, Noel was an absolute mess. He opened up a little bit to Liam. He wrote him a letter and slid it under his door, trying to kind of sort things out, trying to get some kind of peace.
I remember some fucking soppy note coming through the door saying like, "How can we go on like brothers?" It was like, fuck right off. So that got rolled up, and then another line of crystal meth went up the old fucking tubular bells.
Tony McCarroll's book also adds a little bit of context and background as to why Noel lost it so badly after that Whisky A Go-Go gig. McCarroll says that this night was the peak of Noel's long-term frustration at never-ending months and months of wild, unprofessional behaviour from the rest of the band. All of Noel's ongoing frustrations with the rest of the band came to a head that night, and he took all the money he could get off Maggie, the tour manager, took his passport and vanished.
I'd met this girl at an Oasis gig. I must have phoned her and said, it's fucked up here. I got on a plane and flew off to San Francisco. It was quite a traumatic time, but Talk Tonight was written about those few days.
And at this point, the story of what happened next is quite literally narrated by the lyrics to the song Talk Tonight. I think this was Noel realising after the LA gig that he'd had enough and he wanted to leave Oasis. He called Melissa Lim and asked if he could come to stay, and she of course said yes. So Noel boarded a plane back to San Francisco without telling anyone where he was going, and he went into hiding in Melissa's flat in the amusingly named Lower Nob Hill. He arrived distraught, determined to quit the band, and strung out still on drugs. Melissa Lim said, "He was very upset. I took him in, fed him, and tried to calm him down. He wanted to break up the band." Noel stayed with her for days, hiding away, recovering, and just processing everything that had happened in the preceding months with the band to lead up to that awful moment at the Whisky A Go-Go. Meanwhile, the management were panicking, cancelling gigs, and desperately trying to find out where Noel had gone. One day, while out for her usual supply of Snapple strawberry lemonade, Melissa Lim recalls bringing back a handful of British music magazines to the apartment, all of which included prominent features on Oasis. She said that they went to Huntington Park to help clear his mind, they listened to music, and they went record shopping. It was, at this point, literally Melissa Lim who saved Oasis. She said, "San Francisco has a reputation of being a place where bands come to die, like The Band and the Sex Pistols. I wasn't going to let it happen on my watch. I told him, you can't leave the band, you're on the verge of something big."
She was saying, what, you're going to leave? And what are you going to do? And I guess at that point I'm thinking, oh well, actually that's a fucking good point. What am I going to do? I can't sing. I wasn't a singer then. I'm no front man. I just needed a bit of time out, I guess.
In the end, Marcus Russell and the band's management managed to track Noel down by pulling his phone records and seeing the last number he called before he disappeared. They realised it's a San Francisco number, and they remembered he'd had a fling there with a fan.
I kind of sat in this girl's flat, probably doing too many fucking drugs and being a bit fucking mad. Unbeknown to me, they'd found out this is where we think he is.
Using that phone number, they managed to track him down and to convince him to return. Those few days with Melissa Lim, however, were a crossroads for Noel. They were a pivotal point in his entire life. In that time, he figured out what he needed to do to be able to cope with remaining in the band. He became a much firmer, tougher, and perhaps more ruthless band leader.
After that night, it was more me and them, as opposed to us.
And the new era started when he walked back into that hotel, and everything was different after that. And we all had to be different, because if you're not with him, you're going home.
I think he realised after the Whisky A Go-Go that what happened there could not be allowed to happen again because it would sabotage his future. And so, to stay sane and to keep some kind of order out of all the chaos of Oasis in '94, Noel Gallagher took charge. I wonder what those conversations were like between Noel and Melissa, where he basically made up his mind and decided what he was going to do next. I wonder if either one of them can even remember the specifics now. But whatever they talked about, it was in those few days hiding out in Melissa Lim's apartment that Noel made his dreams while chained to the mirror and the razor blade. The song Morning Glory is probably one of Noel's more cryptic songs, but I do believe that it was actually written about that time, that pivotal turning point time in his life in San Francisco. The first line, the mirror and the razor blade, it's an obvious reference to cocaine, and Noel was doing a lot of drugs at the time when he was with Melissa. Now I could be wrong here, but to me this sounds like it could be about Noel and Melissa walking in Huntington Park, Noel and Melissa going and buying records. Specifically, Revolver by the Beatles, on which the song Tomorrow Never Knows is one of the highlights. This line really ties in with exactly what Noel was doing when he was staying with Melissa Lim. He was recovering, he'd gone into hiding to let his mind recover, to kind of rebuild after the awful show at the Whisky A Go-Go. He needed a little bit of time to just get back to square one to rest his mind. Melissa Lim says that her and Noel stayed in touch for the remainder of the Definitely Maybe tour, and they even met up a third time when Oasis shot their less well-known American music video for the song Supersonic. At that time, she was also introduced to Liam, who she simply described as a gentleman. Noel and Melissa continued to talk on the phone regularly, maintaining a kind of long-distance relationship in which she would answer the phone saying, "What's the story, Morning Glory?" And obviously, that line stuck with Noel. Melissa got it from an old film called Bye Bye Birdie, in which girls are talking about their new boyfriends.
Hi, Nancy. Hi, Ursula. What's a story? Morning Glory. What's a tale? Nightingale. Did you hear about Hugo and Kim? Hi, Margie. Hi, Alice. What's a story? Morning Glory. What's a word? Hummingbird.
It's funny because Noel had no idea about the origins of the phrase, and I bet if he had known, he wouldn't have used it. However, there's no way that Noel could have written the lyrics to a song in which the chorus is her catchphrase without having her in mind.
On the Definitely Maybe tour, I'd met this girl in America. When we would meet, she would say, "Hey, what's the story, Morning Glory?" Right? Now, I don't know what the fucking hell it ever meant. And I was talking to some American journalists yesterday, and I said, "What does it mean?" They're like, "Well, I've never heard it before." And I was like, "Well, I thought it was like an American, like top of the morning to you, you know what I mean? Something like that." Again, I thought, what's the story, Morning Glory? And I shoehorned it into that tune. Why it's ended up as the title of the album, I don't know.
I think, along with Talk Tonight, Morning Glory is another song written about his time hiding out in San Francisco. I think this one is about him kind of deciding what he was going to do next, whether he was talking to Melissa or out walking in the park or just resting his mind. I think Morning Glory is just one of many songs that Noel secretly wrote for Melissa, about Melissa, or about their time together. Melissa and Noel stayed in touch long distance by talking on the phone, but their sort of relationship petered out towards the end of 1994 when Noel met his future wife and future mother of his daughter, Meg Matthews. From that point on, the closeness between Melissa Lim and Noel Gallagher was over. But I don't think he ever really forgot her. I have actually come to think that a huge amount of the second album was in fact inspired by her in many places, most of which we probably haven't figured out yet. And here's a large part of why. Never mind the fact that he named the album in memory of his brief relationship with her. Never mind the fact that he wrote perhaps the most raw, intimate song of his whole career for, about and to her. The last little jigsaw piece that convinced me of Melissa Lim's massive, secret, invisible influence over one of the greatest British albums of all time was this. On the 1st of February 1995, once Noel was in his relationship with Meg Matthews, Oasis were back in America. They were in fact back in San Francisco performing at the Fillmore. Of course, Melissa Lim came to the gig and was reunited with Noel once more. However, this time Noel was kind of distant with her and they didn't pick up where they had left off. He was in a new relationship and he had mostly moved on. However, still wanting to stay friends with him, Melissa Lim said this: "It's okay, I know we're just friends, I won't look back in anger." So Noel says he wrote Don't Look Back in Anger after a night at a strip club in Paris. Oasis played the Bataclan in Paris on the 20th of April 1995.
We'd finished the gig and it was a rainy night. Instead of going out and drinking and what we usually would do and stay out all night and have a great time, I took my guitar back to the hotel room and I instinctively felt that that was the night I was going to write that song. You know, the stars were aligned and tonight was the night. It was born that night, in one night.
He debuted the song 2 days later at the Sheffield Arena, where he said this:
Gonna play a brand new one. I only wrote it on Tuesday, so no one's heard this before. I haven't got a title for it either. Slip inside the eye of your mind.
The conversation with Melissa had taken place 3 months earlier, and Noel still had it in his head. 12 weeks. What an impact she must have had. I wonder if he actually wrote the song to kind of get it out because he couldn't stop thinking about it. I wonder if he wrote that song to help himself move on.
The lyrics came that night. The Sally bit didn't come that night. I was singing so, and I didn't have that, the word Sally wasn't in it. It was just something, it was a shape of a word, and Liam heard me singing it and said, "Who's Sally?" And I went, Sally.
I've come to the view that Don't Look Back in Anger is mostly a kind of bittersweet goodbye from Noel to Melissa. I don't really know, but because so many of Noel's relationships have been played out in the media, you get the impression that usually relationships end acrimoniously for him. But this one didn't. This one ended with a kind word, and maybe that's why it impacted him so strongly. Remember, in the lyrics, it doesn't just say her soul slides away, it also says my soul slides away.
Which song on the album has the most interesting backstory of how it came to be?
I guess Don't Look Back in Anger has a pretty good backstory. As some of the lyrics started a year before. I suppose if we dig deep enough, they've all got interesting backstories to some degree, but I guess I'm too close to talk about it in depth, but I'd say final answer, Don't Look Back in Anger.
And don't forget what Mark Coyle said in Supersonic. Noel never says what he feels. He sings it.
Talk Tonight. That's one moody fucking song, that. It shows that little delicate side to him that you just don't really see. He doesn't show these emotions, no. He never did. Apart from when you stick him behind the glass with a microphone and then he can let this emotion loose that he's got. They're my favourite moments. It's like door opens and a bit of light comes in and then the door's shut again, you know, and he's calling you a twat.
Noel and Melissa Lim were separated not by fighting, not by incompatibility, but just simply by distance and the realities of Noel's job. I personally get the impression from those chorus lyrics to Don't Look Back in Anger that Noel really was expressing some sadness and some heartache, that short little time they had together had reached its natural end and that it was time for them to move on. To my knowledge, Melissa Lim has only ever surfaced twice to give her version of events. In Mojo 139, there was an interview with Noel Gallagher in which he said the American girl whose name he claimed to have forgotten was a character in a Morning Glory song and nothing more. However, 2 publications later, in Mojo 141, there appeared a letter from Melissa Lim in which she told her story. This letter was a little bit disappointed, a little bit angry, and pointed out the irony of the latest Oasis album title, Don't Believe the Truth. However, the most well-known account of what happened between Melissa Lim and Noel occurred after the release of the Supersonic documentary, where Noel said this:
if I close my eyes now, I can't even picture the girl. I can't remember her name. It's a bit of a blur.
In the Supersonic documentary, Noel says, "I can't remember her name, I can't remember her face." And even though he is the ultimate unreliable narrator, he was on so many drugs at the time that it might be true. As far as I'm aware, she has in fact only ever spoken to one reporter ever about her time with Noel, and it was Aidan Vaziri from the San Francisco Chronicle. And that article is the only news source I had from which to draw any direct quotes from her. And since then it has just been radio silence. So I wonder if giving that one interview to the San Francisco Chronicle was Melissa Lim's way of saying, "This is my name, this is my face, consider yourself reminded." I wonder what it must have been like for her when What's the Story Morning Glory came out and took over the world. Noel apparently didn't tell her that her words, her fingerprints and her inspiration were all over the album. She simply found out when the album came out. And that is a very Noel way of sharing his feelings. How must she have felt keeping that knowledge to herself for 30 years, that one of the greatest rock albums of the 90s and one of the best songs on it, a song that the whole world was singing, had secretly been written about her?